Okay, so last week you learned about the process through which people learn the attitudes, values, and behaviors that are appropriate to individuals as members of a particular culture. You learned that the function of socialization is to transmit culture from one generation to the next. You also learned how various social agents work together to socialize us as human beings. Now we're going to turn towards social interaction, social structure, and groups. So this week you'll learn about the various ways that people interact with one another and how society is organized into predictable relationships. These two elements are called social interaction and social structure, respectively. You'll see that both are closely related to socialization. We're also going to explore different types of social statuses and social roles, as well as social institutions, which exist to help us get our collective needs met. So much of our social interaction occurs within social groups, which we are heavily influenced by. So of course, we're going to be considering how these concepts are viewed from the viewpoint of the main perspectives, which you can read about in your textbook. And by that I mean, of course, functionalist theory, conflict, and the interactionist approach. Social structures are made up of two components, social status and social role. A social status refers to a position you hold in relation to other people. So for example, you are a piano player. Other people are not piano players. You are a parent. Other people are not parents. So these boundaries, knowing what statuses you have and what statuses you don't have, define who you are. Other statuses include, being a son or a daughter, being an employee, being a student, being a customer, being a shopper. So you can see that we hold many different statuses simultaneously. There are three types of statuses. There's the achieved status, ascribed, and master status. An achieved status is one that is voluntary and earned. So, for example, I have a master's degree. I am an instructor at a community college. I'm a resident of Rhode Island. These are achieved statuses. These are not my birthright. On the other hand, you have ascribed status. These are involuntary. So for example, I'm a male, I am a brother, I am a son. I didn't have a choice in assuming these roles. They were kind of put on me naturally. Okay, and then there's master status. Master status is one that dominates all the others. So when you think of all your statuses, which one do you identify the most with? And which one are you known mostly for? So, for example, say you ran into Britney Spears at the mall. Would you say, oh, there's Britney Spears, the shopper, or the daughter? You'd say there's Britney Spears, the singer, right? So, singer is Britney Spears' master status. Now, social role is different. This is the other half of social structures and interaction. A social role is a set of behavioral expectations that are associated with a social status. So, for example, if you're a student, there are a set of expectations of how you are to behave as a student. That's a social role. If you think of it as acting, you're playing a character. You know how a certain character is supposed to behave. You're taking on that kind of role. So say you are a student. You're expected to, show up on time to class, complete your assignments according to what's been prescribed by your teacher. How do you know what these expectations are? You learn these expectations through the socialization process. So you can see how these topics kind of build on each other. There are some problems associated with social roles. Some here are role strain, role conflict, and role exit. Role exit is not necessarily a problem, but so let me just take you through these really quickly here. Role strain refers to the notion that we can become overwhelmed in our roles. Performing the expectations of our statuses can be overwhelming. That is role strain. Role strain refers to one status. And I'll give you an example. Say I'm a student and I just can't keep up with my homework. I've got to write a paper by tomorrow and I have no idea what to write about. I'm extremely stressed out and I can't sleep. So I decide to go online and take out my Visa card and buy a term paper that somebody else has written. So this is an example of role strain, which resulted in a behavior. In this case, I bought a term paper. So note that I'm referring to one status, a student. I was overwhelmed by the role and in the expectations of what it means to be a successful student. Now, role conflict involves two or more statuses. So role conflict is similar to role strain, except that you have the two or more statuses. So for example, say that you're a student and you also work a full-time job. I'm sure that some of you know what this is like. Each of these statuses has a set of expectations associated with them. So what happens when you have an exam in 2 days and your boss calls you and demands that you work a double shift? You have role conflict. Role conflict can lead to burnout, and so you just need to be aware of how roles can kind of conflict with each other and understand how these different expectations can kind of, one can kind of pull you in one direction and another set of expectations pulls you in an entirely different one. Role exit, on the other hand, refers to a transitional process where one disengages from a role that is central to one's identity, with the intention of assuming a new role, perhaps. So these transitions can stir up a lot of feelings, either positive, negative, or mixed feelings. So for example, leaving a job, or changing careers, or getting a divorce, or moving out of the family home to attend college. These are all examples of role exit. So virtually all of us experience role exit at some point in our lives. Some role exits are welcome, while others are painful and frustrating. So social institutions play an integral role in our lives and even influence our thoughts and behaviors. So in a nutshell, social institutions give structure to society. They're kind of its backbone. They help us organize and meet our collective needs. So for example, every time someone wants to get an education, at BCC, for example, we don't have to start from scratch trying to figure it all out. You just go to the enrollment center and you fill out a form. You enter your Visa card and pay for your classes, and a bill is generated. Imagine if we had to recreate this entire process every time you wanted to come to school. Be pretty inefficient, wouldn't it? So we have built, as a society, structures called social institutions, and they provide a framework for, in this case, gaining the knowledge for purposes of perhaps gaining a higher status in society or earning a degree. So you'll find that most sociological textbooks and teachers are devoted to studying the different social institutions, which include education, religion, government, politics, the economy, the media, the mass media, our legal institutions, the military. So each of these serves a basic need. Families regulate reproduction. They socialize and protect children. They foster and promote stable, loving relationships. Religion addresses our concerns about life after death and the meaning of suffering and loss and the desire to connect with a higher force or a higher power. Education transmits knowledge and skills across generations and introduces children to values and norms of the larger society. The economy produces and regulates the distribution of goods and services. Healthcare and medicine heals the sick and injured and cares for the dying. Government and politics allocates power. It determines authority. It prevents chaos, although that's questionable at times. The law and the legal system maintain social order and enforces norms. Science, they study the environment. The military protects us from foreign enemies or foreign foes and enforces our national interests. And the media disseminates information. They report events and they mold public opinion. And this is absolutely critical in a democracy. So you can see that each of these institutions has its own set of norms, values, roles, groups, and organizations. So we'll look at these later in the semester. Okay, so let's move on to groups. A group refers to any number of people with similar norms, values, and expectations who interact on a regular basis. So there are two types of groups, primary and secondary. Primary groups provide small, intimate, face-to-face association and tend to have a high level of cooperation and understanding. Secondary groups, on the other hand, are formal, impersonal groups with little social intimacy and mutual understanding. So you're actually in a secondary group right here in this class. We join with others on many different levels every day. We belong to many different primary groups and even more secondary groups. Families are our closest ties and are considered to be the most influential of the primary groups because they help us develop our social identity, which includes our attitudes and behaviors. Every group we join with offers some degree of shared experience, loyalties, and interests, and that includes this class. How many times do we walk by someone and we say, "Hi, how are you?" or "How's it going?" The response is usually, "I'm good." If you feel safe enough to share how you are really feeling, chances are you are speaking with a member of a primary group. If you just say, "I'm good," might be a secondary group. There's a kind of a clue. Secondary groups tend to be much larger than primary groups. Your coworkers are considered to be a secondary group. Secondary groups will often have a shared goal or interest. When I went through my master's program, I studied with the same students throughout the entire program. We got together outside of class to work on assignments and occasionally to socialize, but we were there for a purpose, to earn a degree. So after our goal was reached, secondary groups tend to disband. Okay, so let's move on to in-groups and out-groups. So when you were in high school, my guess is that there were different groups, and you probably belonged to one of them. When I was in high school, we had the jocks, the nerds, and the burnouts. So if you were a jock, the nerds and the burnouts would be considered out-groups to you, and vice versa. So in-groups are any groups or categories to which people feel they belong. The key is to feel a connection. Out-groups are any groups or categories to which people feel they do not belong. Outgroups are those for which you feel a sense of competition, perhaps, or opposition. If you refer to a group of people as they, chances are you're referring to an outgroup. Both in-groups and outgroups play a very important role in defining your identity and how you behave and how you view the world. So, speaking of groups, sometimes being a part of an in-group, you can feel a sense of superiority. Perhaps you feel that your way of doing things is better than the out-group. And sometimes it can be harmful. For example, the issue of same-sex marriage. You have this. The in-group would be considered perhaps to be heterosexual married couples who oppose same-sex marriage. Now, I remember reading many times these people who oppose same-sex marriage, they would say that, well, we can't let them get married because my marriage will be, I don't know the terminology, but watered down or not mean as much. So there's this sense of competition and superiority. So that's kind of an example of how in-groups and the dynamics between in-groups and out-groups. So a bureaucracy is a component of a formal organization that uses rules and hierarchical ranking to achieve efficiency. So, it seems that the word bureaucracy is a dirty word these days. You're supposed to cringe if you call someone a bureaucrat. But bureaucracies serve an important role in complex societies like ours. A bureaucracy helps us deal with repetitive tasks in a more efficient manner. So, if we didn't have a system for renewing your driver's license or having a driver's license at all, or applying for a building permit or applying for a student loan, imagine how long it would take, much longer than it already does. So without bureaucracies, we'd wait a very long time to get things done. So bureaucracies also ensure some level of fairness because everyone gets theoretically treated equally. And on the other hand, Americans love to hate bureaucracies, and sometimes frustration is justified. For example, bureaucracies are not very good at dealing with unique cases or when a sudden crisis develops. The rules and regulations are so entrenched that there's not much room to be flexible. It can seem like a cold, uninviting place. It seems like there are rules for rules. So getting through the red tape can be very frustrating, but nevertheless, they do serve a very useful purpose if the mission is clear. And that's really the key. The mission needs to be clear in order for that to kind of filter through the organization.